Welcome, everyone. Today we're talking to Tim Reissman, an associate professor at the University of Dayton in the Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. Tim leverages engineering principles to improve the efficacy of mechatronic systems like prosthetics and exoskeletons, in particular with respect to the human-machine interface. Tune in to learn more about how his research is helping us realize the potential of wearable robotics. And now, here's Tim Reissman. Hi, Tim. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on, Josh.
So, Tim, when we first met, I think you were wrapping up your postdoc at what was then called the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, now the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. Since you've published across quite a wide range of topics, I was wondering if you could start by providing our listeners with a general overview of your academic trajectory so far.
Yeah. So I would say that it's certainly not a linear path. And I would probably say that that has a lot to do with I was always encouraged to try as many experiences as possible before you really kind of know for certain that this is something that you want to devote, a small amount of time or a large amount of time to. So, give you an idea of a background. I did my studies at Cornell University, undergrad through grad. And while there, when you stay at the same institution, sometimes you see a lot of different things and you try a lot of different things, right? And something that I was really poised about really early on, actually, was as an undergrad, we had a alumni come in who had a startup. And that startup was about how do you do open heart surgery without stopping the heart? And that was just like mind blowing to me, right? Like first that you have to stop the heart to do surgery on the heart, right? And then bring the person back to life. And one of the approaches that they actually did was they tried to control the surface so that they could actually do surgery on the surface without actually having the heart stop pumping. And so they had guys in there who were vibration experts, controls experts, biomedical experts. And it was just like, okay, you don't necessarily know all the answers to these things. How do you start getting the background for it? And so I really wanted to do something in that realm, but at the time, I'm going to date myself a little bit. It was around 2000s, early 2000s. There weren't a lot of schools that offered that type of thing. This was cutting edge. And so I started looking at, well, what are the classical things that you need to know? And so I went into a controls background and like kind of a vibration dynamics background, thinking that would take me someplace there. And I joined a group that focused on those different things, but had very different objectives and outcomes that they liked. And so I started learning about some things in sensor design, mechatronics, electromechanical systems, like things like piezoelectrics, energy harvesting, vibrations, stuff that is very much a cool background to have for developing different devices that I do today. That hasn't narrowed my path of different things that I can do, but is certainly things that I was publishing on, at that time that I collaborate on now, but I don't lead, is what I would say. And so that took me down this path of, thinking about energy from a different perspective of like devices, energy transfer, getting into at some point looking at things like even like metamaterials. So if you look at kind of where my Google Scholar list, if you will, you would say, oh, this guy does like a whole bunch of different realms. And it was because those are things that I was passionate about the time, things that I'd like to learn about. And that was great. That kept me motivated and interested in. And at a certain point, though, my wife, who is also an engineer and professor at the University of Dayton, always knew what path she wanted to do, right? She was always very laser focused. And she said, I thought, when you started, you were really interested in doing something that was more of this biomedical application. And I said, I am. And she said, well, take the leap of faith, right? Sometimes you feel like you might get cornered in this pathway. And so I said, okay, I'll try a leap of faith. And so I went into this group at the Rehab Institute of Chicago at the time that was a Center for Bionic Medicine. And they specialize in prosthesis and orthotics and things like that. And they looked at me as the engineer who could solve a bunch of things in a different way, but was really interested in where that field was in that type of research. And so I did that leap of faith, and that was about 2013, 2014. So, almost a decade after I had seen those different things. And the rest is kind of history of now looking into like assistive devices, having that be the thing that I'm actually experimenting on. So an interesting question I had when I interviewed on that leap of faith was, are you a theory guy or an experimentalist? Right, is one of the things that a physician just asked me. And I said, well, I know a lot of theory guys, and I'm probably not one of those. I'm more of the person who's going to validate that this design works with a physical thing. And he said, that's awesome. But are you validating it just that it does the technical description, or is it actually meeting like the objective, right? Like, does it isolate that heart, right? In like, in a, like, on like a certain system that you're emulating it, or are you actually trying to do heart surgery with this device, right? Are you actually trying to find out how that prosthesis improves their daily life? Like, what is it that it's actually achieving from an experimental standpoint? And I said, oh, I never get to do that. That's almost like, companies may not even do that all that much, right? And he said, that's what we're doing here. That's where you're going to take this actual leap of faith. It isn't so much your background as an engineer, it's how you're testing these things, how you're evaluating them. And so that's where I've been. I teach a lot of students on how to do that technical design, but then I have a lot of students where we say, now we're going to do that other part of the engineering. Some might even call it the science of how well it's actually working. So sorry for the long answer, but that is kind of the pathway. If it's never straightforward, but if you stay passionate, I think you can always stay engaged.
No need to apologize. That was fascinating. I definitely learned something today. I never thought that you needed to stop the heart to work on it. I mean, thinking about it now, it seems obvious, but wow. Um, yeah, I feel like in life, there, at least for me, I've always felt a compulsion, like I needed to focus in order to achieve a big impact. But I've also struggled to find focus without first exploring and dabbling in a lot of different things. Um, it's really nice that you kind of told the story from that perspective, because I often interact with folks earlier in their careers where they're struggling to find focus, and I think that's totally okay. That's natural. Um, huh. So jumping off of that, you've thought about a lot of the big problems in technology development for wearables and in different areas. I feel like there's a lot of technology in this field that has not quite realized its potential, and the stuff that you're working on might be the solution to a lot of that. So I'm curious how you see where we are today and where we could be if the investigations that you're doing in your lab prove fruitful.
Yeah, so I mean, one always hopes that your work is going to have a large impact, right? No matter where you're really trying to work on and things like that. And so everyone has a contribution, is what they're aiming for. And so, from kind of this roundabout way of thinking about things, I was working when I was in Chicago on prostheses, right? And it is not a very large field, to be honest. There might be a lot of interest, just because of depending on what age group you come from and things like that. The Bionic Man versus like world's fastest runner. To just seeing Luke Skywalker's hand, right? Like that from all these things from movies and stuff like that that people get um, excited about. But when I was being trained in this area, I learned that the truth is that while you can make large impacts, you really need to understand what are the challenges, and how do they overcome them, without having this device. And people are amazing in how they adapt. We're always adapting based off of our abilities to try to, achieve what it is that we're trying to do, if we can do it. And so that was something that really struck me. We're only about an hour away from one of the largest prosthesis manufacturers in the country. That's out of Columbus area. And when I came over to them, they said, "Oh, what are you working on now?" And I told them about it, and they said, you know, "Take a look at this. We have 100 different feet options." Right? Imagine you walk into a store and you have 100 different shoes that you can choose from. Right? Which one works best for you? It becomes daunting, right? And 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 there's still people designing more prosthetic feet, right? And it's not that that isn't perhaps needed for whatever application or thing that they're trying to do, but it becomes hard to know whether you're making that impact, right? And so what I learned from my experience more than anything, like I said, is that people adapt, and it's very hard to make conclusions. What's the best shoe might be different for every runner, or me versus my wife, right? And so then the question became more in my mind: how do we improve the things that people want in life, as opposed to what objective we're trying to do? And the biggest thing is mobility, is what they talk about at the hospital. Like, if you can stay mobile, you will stay healthier, period. Right? Like, if you once you start losing a lot of that mobility, then you have an issue. And so one of the things that we've been doing here now is we've been just trying to think about, how does mobility change, right? And what are some ways that we can quantify that? What are ways that we can study that? What are ways that we can improve that as engineers? And so that's where it came into some of the things that we're doing. I admittedly don't work as much in amputee research, just for lack of access to a lot of different participants, which may be a good thing. But we do have a lot of people who still struggle with mobility. And so now we're looking more into the exoskeleton realm of things. And some of the things that we really like to look at in that is ways in which we can tailor some activations and things like that, tailor some movement when people are walking, that we don't necessarily have to buy, 5 different exoskeleton suits to do, right? When I first started looking at, what are the costs of some of your most popular exoskeletons that you can purchase on the market, the R&D version where you can actually get into these are 6 figures almost always, right? For every one of them. So if you tell me that I have to buy a house, 6 times, I'm going to say I don't need that many houses, right? Like, I don't know if I can actually do this. And um, so we start looking at other ways, and you could design your own, but it ends up costing a lot to do that as well. And you don't necessarily know that you're making something better than what is out there, or even addressing the things that you're originally trying to go for. So that's where we came to Humotech at a certain point. We had known about what you've been doing. We had met each other way back in around 2016. And we started to try to think about ways in which we might be able to use that technology so that we could answer those questions quicker, get to that science faster. And so that's really where we've been. We've tried to come up with some new ideas that I'm certain we might be able to chat about on this podcast, about different new, maybe end effector devices that could answer some of those mobility questions. Yeah, we really wanted to focus less on the, let's say, if you will, the time it takes to invest into that design work, and get more into how does it actually experiment with the person, and have that flexibility, and be able to launch that way.
Interesting. I definitely want to talk more about the solutions you're building. But I'm curious if you can talk a bit about um, your your sort of clinical collaborations, because that seems like an important pillar for you, going back all the way to the beginning of your story. How have you managed to form those strong collaborations where you're really well in touch with uh, the need and not getting too carried away building solutions where there isn't, that need?
Yeah, so great questions. I try to talk to this with my students a lot. So whether they're undergrads or graduate students, that designing for people without including them in the process is going to be a disaster, like every time. Like you really need to talk with everyone in this process, and the clinicians are a very big role in that process, along with the end user themselves. And so and sometimes even the caregivers if they're more on the day-to-day. And so um, truth be told, when I had my training in this, I was in like a research hospital, so they were everywhere, right? Like you go around and you would hear people doing physical therapy, you would hear people talking to their to their doctors, and then coming over to do research. And so it was all central, and it was essential to doing good experimental research in this, rehabilitation engineering is what I would call it. And so what we did was we always created that as part of the process, right? You don't want to just get a quantified thing from a sensor. You need to start finding out, okay, what is it that would encourage you to use this? What are you really wanting from, to help you with, walking, standing up, um, that transition from seated to standing? Like, what is it that is really the challenge? And if that's a challenge, that was something that we can then have possible solutions to talk about, including them in that process. And so we at our university have set up our lab right in the same building where we have our physical therapy department. We set it in the same, which is also the same building that has health and sports science, in case we're doing something that's maybe geared more towards athletes. There's also the physician's assistant program. We don't have a medical school, so that's kind of the closest thing. And so we have our program where we teach our engineers in biomechanics and biomedical type of a situation or concentration in that environment. They are not in the engineering building. They are the engineers coming in to try to see if they can come up with ways to analyze, identify the problem, work in that realm. But they are immersed, and I think that that's the, if you're going to learn a language, right, go to that country if you can, right? Is a great way to do it. And so immersing yourself in that environment, and then also making connections outside of it. So I know you guys do this as well, but I reached out to that company that's only an hour away from us, to understand what they look at when they're trying to understand what they're trying to do. I reached out to our local clinics, especially ones that want to do, have perhaps a gait analysis lab or something like that. And so we work with them. We try to share our skills, and we try to share our experiences so that we can really come up with better definitions of what it is that we're trying to do. And believe me, everybody is very everybody who's invested in this type of thing, like mobility or helping people in need, all really do come together when it comes to that realm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You just have to commit yourself to it. It's kind of baked into our DNA as a company, that our products should be highly accessible and inclusive. We've worked very hard to develop a system that is both open, very open. I mean, you can lift up the hood and change anything that you want, while at the same time being very easy to use for people of varying expertise levels and and goals. I love what you're saying about kind of being co-located with people from different disciplines. I also think it's really interesting how you're incorporating the Caplex system into classwork or coursework, both at the undergraduate and
Yeah.
graduate level. This is something that we really want to do more of. Um, and because I think the earlier you can put these tools in the hands of somebody who wants to work in this field, the better intuition and experience they'll develop as far as the application of biomechanical principles, which you can read about in a book, and you can do some analysis using traditional, means. But at least I believe our system enables this really unique ability to directly manipulate biomechanics in real time and measure the response. Yeah, I mean, all of our customers are applying this in some way in kind of research and development. But I think what you're doing with the educational piece, really unique. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit about your goals for this and kind of how it's going.
I will say that so we're not a very big school, right? So if you say I want to have a huge piece of equipment come in, right? They're usually going to ask you, who else can use it, right? And that's a very legitimate thing. Collaboration goes a long ways, and obviously everyone's trained on how to use this that uses it, but being able to identify that at first, and but even when we talked about, potentially there'd be 3 to maybe 8 faculty that could use this system, they still said, I don't really know, right? Let's think about it. And one of the things that we really came across was, well, who are we really impacting, right? Like when you think about this from a broader standpoint, right? Is it only the handful of graduate students that get to access it? Is it only those that are doing research can see it? Is it going to be tucked away in a lab that, maybe a very famous lab, right? And maybe a very famous you know faculty member, and then it gets exposed to hundreds if not thousands of people that way through the research, but it's something you're reading about. It's something that you're watching a video of. You're not actually getting to come in and touch. And so, or even use, experience. And so we came up with this idea that we were going to not only share our equipment among us to try to pool our resources, but we were also going to do it kind of in the realm of what they were doing at the now Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, right? So they immerse all of their researchers right on the floors where they're doing physical therapy and everything like that. And so they get, that's their education. And so we said, really like this concept. What is our real goal? Not to say anything about the research side, is to educate the next level of engineers that come out, right? And so we said, what if it's a classroom? What if it's literally a teaching lab slash research lab that you can come to? And now this isn't in somebody's lab that they can call dibs on, and when you use it, it's a shared facility that is also has a classroom designated side to it. And so now we have every semester around 70 to 80 students, that not counting the researchers, that go right past all of our major equipment, including the Caplex. And they get to see it for their class. They might even be able to use it in terms of part of their class. They may just have it be a demo that they get to, like, either be the person who hops into the device and tries out a few things, or they get to physically observe it or even control it a little bit as part of an exercise. But they're getting to see this technology, and they're getting to think, what can I do next? Instead of just hearing that story that we were talking about before, they're experiencing that story, right? And so I think the big thing for us was that was where our administration just said, this is beautiful, right? Like, we'll start to try to work with you to see how we might be able to do this. And we might not be able to get you that equipment, but we can get you the facility to do that, right? and then you might have to do some work to get that equipment um, via other mechanisms. Um, but this is a great idea to have this type of thing be there. And so now, that's every semester we have, 60 to 80 students coming through just interested in this and wanting to see a Caplex system that emulates, wearable robotics or wearable technologies. They also get to see a instrumented treadmill, what EMG looks like on their signals, all that maybe even combined together. All these things are now things that are getting them to think about possibilities and hopefully what we call thinking about their vocation or their career. We did this because I know that I'm a very hands-on type of learner, and everybody's a different type of learner out there. And so the more modes that you can give to people's learning and education, the more they might get engaged and actually, learn something.
That's awesome. University of Dayton's clearly ahead of the curve here. It makes me think of how technology like 3D printers is now ubiquitous in every university STEM curriculum, and that has vastly improved or increased accessibility of just making things. 3D objects that previously would have required extensive machine shop training in. It's hard to imagine the world now without 3D printers. I'm hoping for something similar with wearable robotics because I think to solve many of the grand challenges in the field, we're going to need a vast increase in the number of minds that are working on solving those problems. I think you're making a big impact. I know all this work that we're talking about with the Humotech system was enabled by an NSF grant. And I think you were pretty creative in finding a pathway that personally I hadn't heard of before. I'm wondering if you can speak to that insight and how you see the agency's mission as a good fit for what you're building, both in the education and on the research side.
Yeah, so I alluded to it a little bit. We, as a smaller institution, we don't have as much of a startup that we can really give to all of our faculty. But it doesn't mean that we can't do the research. It just means that we have to find another means to achieve some of the things that we're looking to do. And so, some of the ones that are more classic when you try to think of major research and trying to get that funded are usually through the Department of Defense. To be honest, they have DURUP and things like that you can do through any of their different agencies. But a lot of our focus again is on education. A lot of our focus is on health and well-being. We were trying to understand where we might be able to go with this, and one of the things that our university had a little bit of success for in the past was this mechanism from the NSF called the Major Research Instrumentation Award, or the MRI. And so we had an idea of how to write a decent grant for it. We just weren't your typical grant application, I would say. So most of the time they're looking for somebody that needs something for spectroscopy or some kind of microscope that's huge, right? That costs on the order of $500,000 to $1 million for that equipment. And you would see that in a nanofabrication lab or some, chemistry lab that is doing some analysis on different materials or different chemical compositions. And we said, well, quite honestly, what we want to try to achieve is going to be a rather large system. If we want to have a lot of capabilities, if we want to think this is our shot to like really have 8-10 degrees of freedom or something like that we might be able to do where we would have a lot of flexibility in the future. Let's try to think about what we can do. And like I said, you could put together a list of current exoskeleton suits or something like that and put them in a package, but it's not really one instrumentation that you're talking about. It's really multiple, and it's not really educational. It was designed for a specific thing. It was designed for a specific speed, a specific type of user, and that's not really what we were trying to aim for. So the Caplex system really was something that was unique in this realm. And what I liked about it was on the NSF's MRI mechanism, you can either develop something um, or you can acquire something, is the way they put it, right? And to be honest, I'd rather acquire something and get going and maybe have to develop a little bit, but mostly acquire something that I can know what it's going to then be able to deliver upon. That I have a bit higher confidence on. And so what we did was we pitched them to it the same way I talked about that new teaching lab space where everything had shared equipment. We said that, we're going to try to do research, and here's a bunch of researchers that could benefit from this Caplex system, and whether it's you wearing a device or whether it's simply attaching to like a gait belt and doing perturbations. Either way, it has a complete versatility of that. And so we said, these are all and we contacted those researchers and they said, this is an awesome idea. We'll see what happens, right? And because we really didn't know what was going to happen, we looked at all the different awards that have been given. It was always microscopes. It was always something that was an analyzer or something like that. And long story short, we put it together and it looked really good. It looked like a great idea, but we didn't know how it would go. And about 6 months later, as it goes with most of your grant submissions or something like that, we receive an email, from NSF saying, could you write an abstract up for us? We're thinking about this could be a possible selection, and we were just blown away, right? Like now all of a sudden it's something that's a possibility. And from there on, like to be honest, working with a company like yourself where it is an acquisition but it is also development, right? It was amazing to work with something that you get that is seemingly, even though there's other Caplex systems out there, you feel like you have a unique piece of equipment that puts you at the forefront of being able to do some of the technology and the education that isn't going to be outdated, 2 years from now, right? Or 5 years from now. It's going to have those capabilities. It's going to have that flexibility so that you can continue using it as we've classically done with some of our other equipment that we teach. I think a lot of us had, if you're a mechanical engineer, you had an Instron machine that, or whatever company that was breaking metal, right? To tell you about tensile stress and stuff like that. This is that machine to us for, for biomechanical engineers. It tells us how you can manipulate or assist or control mobility. And so it is something that is that quintessential machine, but that just hasn't reached a lot of universities yet. And so the hope is that as we see this more to our students, that they start asking about it, right? And saying like, okay, if you don't have it, how do you create it, right? And so that mechanism was awesome in that, you know, that they were open to the idea. They said that it was a very unique idea. And I think that is something that is also, NSF is very much about education and its broader impacts, but it's also about, where can that intellectual merit, even though it's kind of a different type of mechanism than a classic research proposal, how many different research avenues could benefit from this? And it's a lot, right? We had 8 researchers on there because we're a smaller universities, but I would imagine that if you were to pitch this at another university, it could be even larger group. So yeah, we've enjoyed being able to have now those capabilities, and from both an education standpoint and a research standpoint. And to be frank, we've seen a lot of people think more outside the box on this mechanism with NSF now, in terms of what they pitch for ideas. And so we would be happy to encourage others to pitch a similar idea if they think it could benefit them.
Thanks for sharing all this, Tim. It's really fascinating, and not everyone is so open about their insights in the grants world. There's a lot of competition for limited funds, but we all need to work together to get smarter about how to use the limited federal resources, I think, if we're going to help this field grow. It seems kind of obvious in hindsight that a mechanism like this would make sense. I just hadn't thought of it before. You can't imagine progress in the field of biochemistry if every lab needed to build a new microscope every time they studied some new specimen, or in materials if they needed a new type of instron machine for every alloy. I appreciate you sharing these insights, and it well aligns with what we're trying to do as a company. I think the technology and the funding mechanisms need to continuously evolve together. I've been working in this field for a while now, like 13 or so years, and it's mechanisms don't stay constant. New mechanisms appear, old mechanisms disappear, and even programs that have been around forever constantly evolve. So it's good to be able to help each other stay savvy. So we've been speaking very generally about your work in this field, and I thought maybe we could get a little bit more specific. Do you have a particular mission or technology that excites you? Is there a sci-fi reference that motivated you as a child? Like, what drives you?
Um, so, I mean, what really drives me, like I said, is I took that leap of faith, right? I said that I really wanted to go. I'll be honest, everybody who comes into biomechanics, somebody says something about prosthetics,
Mm-hmm.
like 9 times out of 10. And I don't want to burst their bubble that like there aren't a lot of positions available in this realm, right? But there are a lot of positions available in helping people that have mobility, struggles, or just design work for actual human users. Like everything we do like involves us, right, in some way or some form, right, most of the time. And so what drove me to stay in this field was when I actually got that job, right, and it wasn't necessarily to stay in that particular line of research. It was more like in the rehab or rehabilitation engineering area, right, and saying, how can I contribute to this team? Right? How can I, as an engineer, taking, vibrations and controls and things like that that might seem irrelevant at the time when you're taking them as a student, right? Or disconnected, even if you're doing research in that area, to this new area where I can apply what I've generally been learning and try to see if I can make improvements to this area as an engineer. I'm not a doctor, right? I'm a PhD, but I'm not what you would. I'm not going to give you a prescription, right? And so what I what I've learned is that I can contribute. Engineers are very helpful in this realm, but they have to be, nominally passionate about it to and when I say like I dabbled around, I was focused during that time. I just wasn't thinking that it would always be necessarily the thing that never changed. I was, and so those being able to contribute is the thing that we're doing. And so now that I'm a faculty member, I've been focusing a lot also on the education side. Like, how do I make certain that my students are understanding the research that they're doing, right? Understanding its importance, feeling engaged, feeling passionate about it. Hopefully, they could change their minds. I know my advisor probably thought he's changed his mind, right? But he knows that I'm still applying those things. And so the areas that we're really looking at right now is, as you age, and so I'll get a little bit specific about some of the things that we're doing. As you age, we know that your mobility starts to get a little bit harder to maintain that performance that you did when you were younger, right? Either you're a little less flexible, you have a little less strength, maybe a combination of both, and so we see these things as scientists or engineers, where we will look at older population. We're talking people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and we would compare them to the students we have in the lab on their performance of like those you know uh, 20-year-olds, really, right? And we'd say, oh, look, they're different. And I'm like, newsflash, we already knew that, right? And so what we've been trying to do is bridge that gap, So what happens when you get in your 30s? What happens when you get in your 40s? What happens when you get all the way up to 70? And as opposed to trying to design devices for just 70-year-olds that have already lost some of those things, and regaining them would be, a large effort. Perhaps we can do what they do in preventative medicine and try to keep your mobility as optimal or as good as you can do throughout, so that you can have, what we call quality of life is good throughout, right? We're not trying to target a specific thing. We're trying to understand this continuum. And so we've been doing a lot of studies. Before we had the Caplex, we were trying to understand what your capacity is, what the quality of your walking or your running might be. We do different things to, increase the effort that it would take to do that, just to see what your capacity might be. That could be as easy as putting some, different weights on your body, kind of like some people go with those ankle weights when they're jogging and things like that. And you're like, wow, they must be really into it, right? They have a higher capacity, right? And so we were doing these things. And now that we have the Caplex, we can actively do that as opposed to just doing like passive type of approaches. And so we can see, if I make them work harder, make them work less hard, how do they adapt on those things? And we can try to address different parts of the body that we think are important. So you guys have had for a number of years some ankle exoskeletons that have had different variations and different tweaks that have improved over time. And we all know that that's like where you would get your push off power. And that's where a lot of people focus on their, like around that part to represent, what you might have gotten from your calf muscles, if you will. But when we look at different things, we also said, well, what happens with older adults? Well, we know what happens with much older adults is they start to lose some ankle mobility. They start to lose some of that push off power, and they move everything proximal. So they move everything, like they stiffen the knee because they can't control the ankle that much. Then they move and they do a lot of power, or they do a lot of control. I wouldn't necessarily say power, but they do a lot more control at the hip. And so we said, could we have something at the hip? And what was great about working with you guys is that we said, when we originally pitched this, hey, you guys have a hip device, that's what we would want to get. And as we then got the grant, you said, would you want to make that hip device a little better? And we said, yeah, we can kick in some other funds that we're still acquiring a hip as we originally said, but we're gonna try to see if we can maybe advance this with all the extra capabilities that we got with this package, like with this system, so that we can start doing some things that we've been talking about. And if older adults, as you age, you start to bias a little bit more towards the hip and a little less towards the ankle. If we have both, we can start understanding those things. And so you guys were great with developing a new hip exo for us. And it allows us to have, a few more degrees of freedom. It allows us to, walk a little bit more normal and things like that. And that's where we've been working with you guys since, on trying to see if we can, help with the development on it, um, you know, see where we can do it in the teaching and things like that. But it really is something that now it's allow us to hit the ground running on, we're without having to necessarily spend time with a master student, or even if they're great, or a PhD student doing this development and waiting 4 or 5 years later when they write their dissertation to say, hey, they validated this thing. We can get it within a year or so time frame, and we've got now something to work with that may be developed further, who knows, but we have a starting point to start answering those questions of what is happening during this time. And we have a whole lot of capabilities now that we didn't have before, that our students, whether they're undergrads, seeing it as a demo or even doing it as like a lab exercise, can go all the way to doing a thing of it as a project, or even as a work for research at the graduate level. And so it's been quite awesome in that realm, that that we can do those types of things and study that and feel like we're, as engineers, trying to identify what is happening as you get older. I know that I tell students and they're like, yeah, you're the middle-aged guy that can test it now. I'm like, all right, I'm great. I'm in the equivalent of, if you will, the, if you're at uh, some place where you're just like, how do I get access to them? Well, professors are already middle aged, right? So there's your access, right? And so maybe it's a little bit selfish of understanding where is it going with me, right? Like in terms of my progression. But I do know that, like, let's say in our area, when I look at what are the individuals that we could help, we are at, you know, a part of the country that loves their state, right? They grow up in Ohio, they stay in Ohio, they they have their kids stay in Ohio, and so they age in the area, right? And if we can provide a benefit to our, people in our area, and help them with their mobility, through things that we learn, all the better, right? And so we do stuff with local hospitals as well and things like that. And we're trying to think about ways that we can incorporate that. But we have ways of understanding how we can help in the world of rehab engineering before you even have that injury or before you have that event happen of what would it be like. And quite honestly, the data on middle age is hard to find these days. So whether you have an impairment or not, there is different things happening. I try to identify those and using things like the Caplex as a way of probing those questions further from a scientific standpoint has been great.
I'm so glad to hear you've derived so much value from the system and from working together. It's what drives me to do what we do. I really like how you kind of turned my question on its head. Um, I, like many engineers, I think, got into this field from a place of just geeking out about the technology. For me, since I was a kid, I wanted to build giant walking mech suits. And then, you hit this. I think if you stay in the field long enough, you hit this sort of trough of disillusionment where you realize that thing you were real excited about, your younger self was really excited about, your older self realizes it's not really possible. And I think this is good. You explained, I think, very nicely the importance of human centered design. So instead of starting with a technology that you're looking to put on a person, um, you really need to spend some time with the people that you're hoping to impact. Um, and from that, you can use your engineering principles and discover solutions. So we're coming up on the hour. I have a couple short questions left.
Okay,
Um,
I'll be brief then.
oh no, take your time. We can always edit it down. But yeah, so for any students in the audience or potential research collaborators or clinical partners, um, anyone who wants to get involved in your really interesting work, I just hoped you could share, the best way to reach you, how to find you on the web.
Finding people on the web is actually easier than one thinks, which is a little scary sometimes. But reaching out to me, in any way that you can find a contact is always, go for it sometimes, right? For the students that are, in my classes and things like that, or at University of Dayton, you can always just come by and see me. I'd like to think that for anyone, I'd be more than happy to set some time aside and, you know, get to hear what interests you, and see if, if there's ways that I can help with your path of figuring out where you want to go and how you want to make an impact or contribute. By all means, just come by and see me. For those that are a little further away that want to know more and things like that, my email is pretty much found on my faculty website, so you can go kind of right there, at University of Dayton. There's other ways that you can probably find different things, but usually email. We have our phone number on there as well if you want to call at my office, if you're more apt to do that way. But what we typically do is we let people see the lab. We tell them a little bit of what we do, depending on what their interests are. And if it doesn't align, then we try to help them find other people that it will align with. We have equivalency of like an REU program here. So we get students that come in during the summer. We recommend people to other REU programs in the country. For those of that are not knowing what that means, it's research experience for undergrads. So typically, anywhere from a sophomore to a senior is eligible. And then for graduate students, I do a lot of just free consulting with, if somebody's like, hey, I'd like to just talk to you, or I do a lot of where I'm on committees at other universities, and things like that. And I'm always happy to contribute and different things like that. What we're here to do really is, at least in my realm, is to educate. And the only way that happens is if you feel like you're learning. And so I look at this as an opportunity for me to really shine in that regard. And so the more you feel like you can come and see me, the better.
Thanks, Tim. I can attest to you being a very friendly and approachable guy. So that's great. It's funny, you mentioned Google Scholar earlier. I actually looked at your Google Scholar a couple days ago, and I first thought, wait, is this the right guy? Your top few biggest publications are in areas I didn't even know you had published in. But fortunately, you have your picture there, so I knew it was you.
Yeah, I will say that for those of you that are researchers, you can rarely predict which publications will take off in terms of citations. What you should do is feel like the work that you're doing was something that was worth your time and worth somebody else's time to read, right? So, like I said, I have things at the top that talk about energy harvesting and metamaterials and additive manufacturing. All those things, I think somebody obviously finds an interest in, and is those that stay in that realm. Hopefully, it's contributing to that area. As you scroll a little bit further down, you'll start seeing something about, technologies that I've worked on within prosthetics research. And then as we go a bit further down, the stuff that's a little bit newer that I've been doing since I've been at University of Dayton, perhaps over time will get a little bit more traction. And that's all great because that means that it's reaching out further. But yeah, I would never say that I do anything for the citation rate or the citation number. I do it because it's something that is of interest to me, and I'm hoping that it's something of interest to others, such that they can start advancing the field.
I love that. I'll certainly be keeping an eye out. Um, all right. So, in closing, I was just hoping you could share a call to action with our audience.
Yeah, so this one was a little bit hard. I know that you shared a few of the questions, and one of the things that I would say that really resonated with me as I was at the Rehab Institute of Chicago, and I mentioned this before, was just to stay mobile, right? Your mobility is one of the most important things to your health. So whether you're doing research in this realm or not, know that the people at Humotech are trying to develop resources and technologies for mobility. We're trying to study mobility so that we can improve it, maintain it, whatever it may be, for throughout your lifetime is what we're really studying here, at least within my group. And that's an important thing to your health. And so it goes way beyond just being able to do sports or being able to, play with your kids or, just get around. It really impacts a lot of other things. And so that's where my focus has really gone. That's where it will continue to be. And as you stay mobile, perhaps you also think about things that you can contribute to in whatever way that you can, right? But your quality of life will be that much better.
Amazing. I love that. I often have moments of inspiration on hikes in the woods, thinking about how my legs work and wondering if something could be improved or changed. Anyway, this has been really great, Tim. Thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your insights and perspectives.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.